Well, welcome to worship this morning. This is Christ the King Sunday, when we celebrate the rule and reign of God that was inaugurated through Jesus Christ. You know, it's interesting that the lectionary reading for today comes out of the Easter narrative. It is about Christ the King and how we interpret his kingship and his rulership. And so today we're looking at the forces that came against the kingdom of love. And we're looking at those who were fearful, those who were weak, and how even fear and weakness cannot overcome God's love for us. And so we're going to interpret this story and this encounter with Jesus and Pilate today through that lens. So we'll start by looking at those who were fearful in this story. They were the Jewish leaders. So here in this story, there are particularly three groups of Jewish leaders who have confronted Jesus and who are responsible for this state and for this story right now where Jesus was arrested and about to be crucified. So to help us understand why they were so fearful, I just want to explain something about the Pharisees, the scribes, and the Sadducees. So the Pharisees are probably the most famous or perhaps infamous of the religious leaders. They were a religious party. The word Pharisee literally means separatist. Okay, so they established a separatist party and they thought they were a little bit holier than others. They had a haughty attitude and their supreme aim was to strictly follow both the written law, which was in Scripture, and also the oral law that was handed down from generation to generation. So they were so strict in observing the law. They looked down upon common people because common people had no hope, like them, in fulfilling the law. So they thought they were better than everyone. However, the common people looked up to them and thought they were fantastic. Like, these are the people we aspire to be like. And so Pharisees, even though they were haughty people, they actually had respect from the people. So then we have the scribes. Their job was to study and explain the law. So whilst the Pharisees were a religious party, they didn't really have a lot of authority as such, whereas the scribes, they were like our theological lecturers today. You know, they were professors of theology or professors of missiology or something. They were the well-educated people. They actually had the highest authority. They were the kingpins in the whole religious leaders. They claimed the highest rank and position and they sought public acclaim from people. They would walk the streets in long and expensive robes so people knew who they were and people respected them. And then we had the Sadducees. The Sadducees were a political party who were favourable to the Roman government. They were priests who established this party. They may be like Donald Trump followers. All Sadducees were priests, okay? So they were priests who really, really appreciated the Roman rule. They only accepted the written law and they would not accept oral law passed down. They denied bodily resurrection. They did not believe that the person was resurrected. They denied the existence of angels and they denied the sovereignty of God. They did not think God had any interaction in human affairs and that humanity were the creators of their own destiny. So of course, when Jesus comes into the scene, he disrupts the Pharisees, he disrupts the scribes, and he disrupts the Sadducees. They do not like him. Just moments or a week or so before this event of him being arrested, the crowds welcomed Jesus as he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. There was huge support. He had a crowd of followers, not just in Jerusalem, but surrounding regions all throughout Israel and even the regions outside of Israel. He was famous. People followed Jesus. But Jesus disturbed the religious leaders' spiritual power. He disturbed their social and religious order because Jesus lifted up the poor. He went to the needy. He went to the sinners. Those people there would never be seen with needy people, poor people, and certainly not with sinners. So he disrupted everything that these Jewish leaders stood for and represented for thousands of years. They did not like him. They were afraid of Jesus. He shattered their world. Everything that gave these leaders identity and power and security was now under threat. So the religious leaders were fearful of Jesus. They worked together and mounted a coup against him. They even paid people to give false testimony. And the religious leaders threatened to riot unless Jesus was killed. You see, fear distorts the truth. Jesus came and presented the truth of God's love to the poor, the needy, the broken, and the marginalized. Their fear distorted the truth of God's love, and it compelled them to deny reality. I wonder, can you identify any time in your life when fear overwhelmed you and distorted the truth of God's love for you, and therefore you were unable to fully experience and receive God's love? Even the most fear-driven and rebellious group of people that this earth has ever seen, there has been no greater coup than this. Even the most fear-driven reaction could not stop the kingdom of love being manifest in the earth. The kingdom of love is greater than the worst, most horrific fear we could ever experience or have. Then there's the weak. That's Pontius Pilate. He was a Roman governor of Judea, and he served under the Emperor Tiberius. He was most known for his condemning Jesus to death on a cross. The other three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, portray Pilate as a reluctant person to crucify Jesus. Pilate, in those accounts of the Gospel, said that the claims against Jesus are baseless. Like, what are you guys doing? These are his words in Luke. What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. You see, Pilate gave in to the Jewish leaders. He compromised. He knew that Jesus had done nothing wrong. He knew he was an innocent man. He knew that he did not deserve death, but he did not stand on his conviction. He was weak. He gave in. He was fearful of what would happen if he stood up to the Jewish religious leaders. He compromised. The accusations of the Jewish leaders motivated Pilate's conversation with Jesus. Pilate wanted to know what was happening. And so this is his words. Upon hearing this, Pilate went back inside his palace and summoned Jesus. Looking over him, Pilate asked him, "Are you really the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "Well, are you asking because you want to know, or are you asking because someone else has told you this?" Pilate responded, "Dude, only a Jew would care about this. Do I look like a Jew? This is your own people and your religious leaders that have handed you over to me. So tell me, what have you done wrong?" You see, Pilate's reply suggested he had no personal interest in this. Basically, Pilate was saying, "Dude, I don't care if you're a king or not. I just want to know what this hoo-ha is about." Jesus looked at Pilate and he said, "The royal power of my kingdom realm does not come from this world, because if it did, then my followers would be fighting to the end to defend me from the Jewish leaders. My kingdom realm authority is not from this realm." You see, Jesus explained that he was a king, just as he claimed. However, he said, the kingdom that I'm bringing, it's not a kingdom that's going to compete with Caesar. Okay, you don't have to worry. Caesar's okay. I'm not going to compete against him. The kingdom that I bring is not from this province. It's not from a neighboring province. It doesn't originate from earth. The kingdom that I'm bringing originates in the heart of God. It originates in heaven. Pilate didn't understand this. He was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And in the end, Pilate sought the compromise. Knowing Jesus had been handed over by the religious leaders out of envy, he appealed to the crowds at the Passover. Pilate thought, the Jewish leaders have him condemned, but what I'll do is I'm going to ask the crowd. "Okay, crowd, I'm going to release to you somebody. It's going to be Barabbas or Jesus. Who do you want me to release?" And because the Jewish leaders had incited the crowd, they all called out, "We want you to release Barabbas." Pilate was like, "Oh no, even the crowd, even the crowd, what am I going to do? I've got the religious leaders and the crowd. I'm going to have to give them what they want." He compromised knowing that he was innocent. The Jewish leaders had convinced the crowd to cry out for Barabbas, and giving in to political pressure, Pilate authorized both the flogging and the crucifixion of Jesus. He just wanted to satisfy the crowd. So he released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. Pilate's, appearance in Scripture is very brief, but it is full of tragedy. He ignored his conscience. He disregarded the good advice from his wife, and he chose political expediency over public rectitude. He failed to recognize the truth even when it was standing right in front of him. His weakness manifested as wanting to please the angry minority. This story of Jesus and Pilate happened just hours after Peter had denied Jesus. His closest friend and disciple also, in his weakness, denied Jesus. So here we have two very convincing stories of how weakness can cause us to compromise. Weakness within our human character and nature can cause us to give in to social pressure or cause us to give in to other things around us just for the sake of keeping peace or fear of what would happen if we stood against it. How and when has weakness manifested in your life? Maybe there have been times you can recall when you have given in to the pressure of the crowd, the family, society, out of fear of what might happen to you, and so therefore denied or compromised or even turned a blind eye to. As I was writing this message, a story came to my mind of an experience that I had about 25 years ago. I was a presbytery rep back in central Queensland, and there was this thing that had been brought to presbytery. It was a pretty big issue, and the whole of presbytery was in favour of it, and they were all like, "Yeah, let's do this." And in my spirit, I was just like, "Oh, I don't feel like this is right." And as I was just sitting and thinking, "God, what do I do? Do I say something?" Because at this stage, I was only 23. So I was the youngest presbytery rep, and there was like 3 females in a room of 65, Uniting Church ministers who were male, and I did not have the courage to put my hand up and ask questions. I was so afraid of I felt like the only person who had a different opinion. And I was so concerned about it, and I even felt that God said to me, and I don't know if this is right or not, but I felt God say to me that in 2 years' time, this is going to explode or implode. But I didn't have the courage to say that in front of all of these well-educated, older, more mature people who knew God and knew things of the church far better than me. So I didn't say anything. And do you know what? In 2 years' time, the situation imploded, and it was a really serious situation. This haunts me, this story, all the time, and I think it reminds me of just how easy it is to give in. We compromise out of fear of what might happen if I say something. I was terrified of being the only voice that disagreed with the whole presbytery, and perhaps if I'd have stood up and said something, others may have agreed with that, but we won't go down that path. I gave in, no different to Pilate and no different to Peter and no different to anyone else who's given in over the years out of fear of speaking up or speaking out. But even our human weakness and our human failure cannot stop the kingdom of love. God's kingdom of love manifests in the earth even though these people in their weakness failed radically. So the kingdom of love. Jesus had previously defined his kingdom by saying what it wasn't. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world," okay? It's not going to be a threat